church is filled with believers who have gotten together to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. It's a very traditional church. On this side of the sanctuary sit the men. The men all wear black suits. They all wear white shirts, no ties. Those who are old enough to have beards, all have beards. On this side of the church sit the women. They're wearing very simple dresses. The dresses look like they've all been cut from the same pattern. There's fabric-colored buttons going down the front. There's a narrow belt around the waist, long sleeves, and a cuff. The women wear no makeup. Their hair is pulled back into a bun, and their head is covered with a kerchief. It's the last song of the evening. The song leader stands in front. The congregation rises, and even though there's no musical instruments allowed in the church itself is filled to the rafters with music. As the parishioners leave the building, the children all receive a brown paper bag, and the brown paper bag is filled with assorted nuts, some candies, and one Christmas orange. My brother, my sister, and I clutch this brown paper bag as we run for the car because we know that we can finally go home and open our Christmas presents. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. In some respects, my Christmas may have looked very different from your Christmas. When I got home, there was no beautifully decorated Christmas tree in the living room. We had not been waiting in weeks in anticipation for Santa Claus to come and deliver our presents. My mom and dad bought our presents. They wrapped them and they put them in the corner by the sofa, which is where we could finally open them when Christmas Eve service was over. I do hope that in some ways your Christmas was like mine, though, because my Christmas was filled with family. Christmas Day, we would always get together with my mom's side of the family. She had a huge extended family. There was lots of aunts and uncles and cousins. My grandma and grandpa always had a special spot in the living room that was their spot of honor, and they could watch all the activity going on around them. On Boxing Day, we did the same thing, but this time it was with my dad's side of the family. I remember my childhood, my youth, as feeling very safe. I had two circles that really surrounded me. One of them was my church circle, the faith community that my parents were a part of, and therefore I was a part of. And the other circle was my family, the huge extended family that I was able to have. And then those circles started to crumble. I remember evenings when our home was filled with tension. There were evenings when my brother and my sister and I would be sent up to bed early. I remember lying in bed, listening to the sound of voices coming from the floor below. I remember my mom slowly walking up the stairs, going into the bedroom next to mine, and crying herself to sleep. The church that I described to you when I started my speech was the Haldimand Church. It's a very strict sect of the Mennonite Church. In the late 1970s, early 80s, the leaders of the Haldimand Church decided that the church itself was becoming too worldly. The members were not set apart from society the way they should be, and so there was a renewal that went through the North American Haldimand Church. And they were asking their members to, I guess, follow some new laws or start practicing some of the church doctrines that had perhaps fallen by the wayside. I don't know what all of those doctrines or changes were that the members were being asked. There's two that I remember that my dad had told me about later on when we had talked about this years later. The church itself, and if you go onto their website, they actually have a website, states that there's really only one way to heaven, and that is through the Haldimand Church. Now, my dad is a very fundamentalist Christian, absolutely, but he does not believe you have to be a Haldimand to get to heaven. He's pretty sure that once you get there, there will be other Protestants. He's not too sure about the Catholics. My dad is also an avid photographer, and the church told him that by taking pictures, he was actually creating graven images or idols, and that was considered a sin, which meant that my dad was no longer able to take pictures of the beautiful world that his God had created. It meant he was no longer able to take pictures of the people that his God had blessed him with. There are a number of things that my dad did not agree with, and so visits by the church elders started. Those evenings when my brother, my sister, and I were sent to bed early were the evenings when these tall men would come to our home, and they had black hats, and they all had black coats, and they carried really big leather-bound Bibles in their arms. Those visits by the church elders did not work. I was not there the day that my father was officially excommunicated from the church in front of his faith community, his family, and his friends. I was not there the day that my mother was officially excommunicated in front of her faith community as well. The reason that my mother was excommunicated was because the church asked her to choose between the church or the man that she had promised to spend the rest of her life with. My mom chose her dad, or chose my dad, chose her husband. When I think about what happened, it's still, you can probably see, it still hurts. There was a lot of pain during that time. And we're told that every good story needs to include a hero and needs to include a villain. And for the longest time, for me, the villain was absolutely the church, and in some respects was also my aunts and uncles who had chosen to stay with the church, and therefore the family gatherings that I had known and loved so much were gone forever. The heroes in my story, though, are my mom and my dad. A lot of people in the church at the time were forced to make very, very difficult decisions, and some people decided that even if they didn't necessarily agree with what the church said, they were going to pretend to agree, because if they didn't do that, they would lose everything that they'd known. And I have to admire my dad so much, because he chose to stand up for what he believed, knowing full well that the consequences would be he would lose his family, and he would lose lifelong friends. I admire my mom for the decision that she made. I had a friend at the time whose mom did not make that same decision. Her mom chose the church. And so my friend got to keep the church, and she got to keep her mom, but she lost her dad. And that family was torn apart. I saw my mom and my dad, my two heroes, working together to create a brand new life for themselves. They found new friends, they found a brand new church community, and they did all of this without any kind of hatred or bitterness. There was absolutely lots of tears. I remember the pain, but they never hated and they never judged. And perhaps the one thing that I learned from all of this is that I've started to look at some of my aunts and uncles less as villains and as people who had to make really, really, really tough decisions. And you had spoken about judgments, and it's very easy for me to get up on my pedestal and judge them based on the decision that they made, but I've never, ever, ever had to be in a situation where I've had to make that kind of choice. And so perhaps in this story, there's not really any villains. There's just people who are trying to make a life for themselves and continue on as best they can. I'm happy to report that because my two heroes, my mom and my dad, chose to forgive, chose to live without bitterness, they are now able to sit at the same table with their brothers and their sisters, enjoying meals together in peace.